I have often been asked to describe what I learned about the esoteric knowledge held by the military, industrial, financial cabal. But it's not entirely possible. Any description would have to encompass subjective views like the esoteric rock upon which an entire planet has been raped and sacrificed, or the biggest secret, whilst at the same time revealing enough technical detail to engage a casual listener and giving some insight into why any of this matters anyway. It's a vast subject, and you could say it's infinite, and I never mean to imply that I know it all, but I found out the smallest parts and then lived them. To write about it, one has to somehow abbreviate that infinity, to set it within comprehensible bounds in order to extract some meaning for someone completely new to this reality, to make the infinite finite some challenge, and to remain sane whilst doing it. Well, I gave up on that illusion ages ago, but in doing so found reason and insight beyond the mere esoteric. So it dawned on me that I could just ramble chaotically in a non-linear way to challenge any listener to follow the implicit commonalities rather than the explicit wording or subject matter. And this has the benefit of not requiring too much detail whilst attracting the potential criticism that sources and references are required. And my point is that they're not. If you wish to discover reality for yourself, that is. They're nothing more than a guide, sometimes insignificant branches pointing to a trunk. Each thread forms a realm of inquiry in itself, so to attempt to describe the whole here would be futile. So I'll try to paint a picture in words and numbers, and you can take it as literally or as metaphorically as you feel inclined, though I would suggest that maybe it's both. It's commonly known today that nature contains beautiful symmetries and geometries. Many insights have been made, nobody denies them, but it has created a chasm between the intelligent design faction and their neo-Darwinist opponents, as propounded by people like Richard Dawkins. Ne'er the twain shall meet, but there is no need for a dispute. Dawkins sees this symmetry and believes it to be the consequence of non-intelligent, self-organizing processes. From this, supposedly, arises the miracle of consciousness. This model takes no account of the fact that DNA has been proven to both receive and transmit information from and to the environment, and it overlooks the Human Genome Project, insofar as it has uncovered anomalies which can best be explained by genetic engineering at some early point in history. Nor does he explain the so-called 100th monkey effect, and surely this is one of resonance. It's readily explained by the current knowledge of the holographic energy matrix, if you want to call it that underlies what science calls 0 point. Indeed, we have holographic technology today simply because the universe is structured on those principles, though I suspect we're only beginning to understand them now. We can generate holograms in our three-dimensional reality ourselves using technology, but the universal hologram is four-dimensional, I would suggest, and that fourth-dimensional aspect is where we lack understanding in the modern era. Dawkins' theory, that is the selfish gene, is surely but part of a profoundly intelligent bigger picture. He should perhaps step back and reconsider his opposition to Rupert Sheldrake and others, the concept of morphic resonance. Dawkins notes the resonance and the patterns in nature, but doesn't ask what is resonating, at what frequency, or even where does it come from. It has to be said that resonance is key to the entire knowledge, yet so many ignore it or confine its meaning to some New Age interpretation and therefore dismiss it as so much claptrap. The beautiful fractal symmetry seen in nature spawned a whole new branch of mathematics called chaos theory. Its greatest tool, fractal analysis, has ironically since then been used to prove that the surface of Mars is indeed covered with non-natural constructs, possibly buildings, cities, and pyramids. But they don't teach you that in school, do they? Neither is the fact that Venus is habitable taught in school. Well, hang on a minute, I hear you say. That can't be right. Scientists have measured the data from Venus. Its atmosphere is thousands of degrees and the pressure is crushing. You know what? You may be right. But if you are, answer this. NASA supposedly obtained its data from sensors parachuted into the atmosphere of Venus. They didn't know before they went there what they were going to find. The parachute was not able to withstand the conditions they claim to have measured and analysed. NASA publishes their inventory for each mission, and this much is provable. The parachute they used is analogous to tissue paper being dropped into a furnace, if their facts are correct. So, come on, I ask you, do you smell a rat? Well, maybe not. But are you aware that many key people from within NASA, and without, are claiming, with direct scientific and documented evidence incidentally, that there is a vast cover-up relating to discoveries that everybody surely has the right to know, matters of immense importance. Furthermore, were you to learn that revelations concerning key NASA controllers made around 2007 were the subject of a special congressional meeting? And I wonder if you might begin to realise that this is real exopolitics. It is actually happening. But why a congressional meeting? Well, that was down to the fact that the revelations include the fact that the chiefs of NASA belong to a Babylonian cult, and that they have covered up this truth about human origins and an awful lot more. Crazy? Well, tell the congressional members that. Plenty of them now know it as a result of that meeting. That which is taught in schools has been interpreted by some as intelligent design, but then abused to justify some ridiculous views and impositions. I've got no personal problem with schools teaching this wonderful geometry to children. Indeed, I'd encourage it. But I do object strongly to it being abused as a vehicle for claiming that Earth is only a few thousand years old, or that the word of the Bible is literal truth and the word of God. Ironically, I suspect that some passages in the Bible do chronicle and encode the word of humanity's creators. These are the passages that were overlooked by the Council of Nicaea and other meetings after that as they compiled what we know as the Bible today. And as a matter of record, they sought to cleanse their faith of heresy when they were compiling the Bible. There is no doubt that there's an underlying order in nature. Indeed, contemporary science and philosophy agree, but creationists, as we define them today, have not understood the history of their own religion or read their Bible with an eye to see. The same can be said of many other religions and their holy books too. When one first engages with this underlying order, it's all too easy to hang it on a peg, which you could call Jesus or God, or to attribute it to any deity. Such a principle is sound, if it weren't for the mind-constricting banality of the institutions that claim to represent these good teachers, or the falsification and indoctrination that they employ, and in some cases the dark intent that lies behind it also. To hang your mind on such a peg is entirely to miss the point, in my humble opinion. Richard Dawkins is a great man, but also misses the point, I think. The underlying order not only is intelligent, but it defines intelligence. It could be said that the order betrays design and intent, and therefore by definition purpose. If this were ultimately discovered to be an incorrect analysis of the contemporary information and knowledge, it strikes me that it might just be better to assume such design and to live one's life according to that assumption. This is not to question the good intent of many vicars, priests, imams, or followers of the faiths. A corrupt institution requires good people every time. It doesn't make these people bad, it makes them human. Very easy to subjugate, but therein lays the knowledge. As an interesting aside, and for any Christian who may be offended by my words, I've mentioned the Mobius strip in previous notes and writings. It models a simple twist in perception. The Bible tells you that Jesus belonged to a specific order. He was indeed a student and follower of Pythagoras. Initiates of Pythagoras were known to history as the Nazarenes. He was also of royal bloodline stock, stemming right back through the pharaohs. He was not of Nazareth, which it is clearly argued nowadays wasn't even settled in those times, but many years after his death. He was, effectively, Nazarene. Understand what Pythagoras taught, and also from where he claimed to have obtained his knowledge, and you'll have an eye to see between the words. Understand also that the institutional Roman Church embarked upon centuries of covering up and embellishing the figure of Jesus, creating a mythologized figure that suited its own purposes. In the same way, the modern perception of Santa Claus was actually created by Coca-Cola and others in their early advertising. Santa Claus, of course, being St. Nicholas, a pagan figure, canonized by the Church to unify its pagan followers. You know, St. Nick, the so-called devil. There's that Mobius strip again. They actively sought out and destroyed this knowledge wherever it surfaced. Libraries of ancient knowledge and wisdom were intentionally destroyed, as history well records. Probably the first recorded crime against humanity. Some religious people can be offended at any suggestion that what they believe isn't actually correct, or that it's been manipulated. But, as ever, the reality is clear for any who look with an interested eye, as opposed to a closed one. I mean, is it likely that an institution that serves the teachings of Jesus is going to indulge in mass murder and terror as it does? And when information is available to enough people for them to realize that the Church was wrong to impose such evil, what does the Church do? Well, if the paedophile cases are anything to go by, it apologizes, whilst defending more sexual abuse cases than any other institution upon the planet, and lowering its age of sexual consent to include young choristers at the same time. Ever wondered why Jesus got so pissed off? He also got pissed off at the moneylenders. The Bible never explained why, but other apocryphal gospels explain it very clearly. Hey, maybe I'm wrong. Pick fault with the detail, but the big picture is overwhelming. How can an institution which engages in bloodshed, murder, terror, and ritual cannibalism, that's the body and the blood, actually convince its followers that it serves a higher God of love and compassion? It uses the Mobius strip trick, or it burns them, even unto this day. So I say to my Christian friends, please don't be offended. This is no blasphemy. The true teachings of Jesus fully support what I say. It's just that they were selectively excluded from the Bible. They have since surfaced again, though. And the line from the Gospel of Thomas alone destroys Christianity as an organized, pyramid structure religion. The kingdom of heaven is within you, it says. It and other Gospels, Luke particularly, further explain that any attempt at organized religion or praying in the company of others is in defiance of the key principles of the teachings of Jesus. To any reasonable mind, it must appear suspicious, to say the least, that Rome adopted Christianity. They were the very enemy that occupied Jesus' land and against whom he fought. So what, meanwhile, happened to the truth? It never did go away. It went underground via the so-called Desposini, the offspring of Jesus' marriage to Magdalene and of James his brother, possibly known also as Joseph of Arimathea. This is no fable, movie, or bestseller. It's history. It's just hidden history. The word occult, incidentally, simply translates as hidden or unseen. It has no negative connotations at all until the church made its followers fear it by associating it with the devil. Or is that Santa? The Mobius strip principle is at work today with certain global leaders. They will tell you what they are going to do, but then do the exact opposite, whilst denying and ridiculing such a thought. This is how they twist reality in your mind. It's a simple psychological tool which resonates with the mind, creates subconscious confusion, and feeds upon that confusion at a psychological level. It's a well-tested technique employed by the CIA and other mind-controlling agencies. In fact, it's almost infallible, unless you are aware of it. If you think this is paranoid fiction, imagine, if you dare, that Derren Brown, for example, the magician, had the entire resources of the industrial, financial, political, and military complex at his command. What illusions do you think he could create with such power? Then consider that he is but one man, and this cabal are many, and not necessarily just men, incidentally. Consider also that he is a master of only one aspect of the esoteric knowledge that this cabal possess. This is one of the keys to understanding the variety of ways this knowledge has been used, and by whom, over centuries. It's a natural science and cosmology of resonance, ironically condemned as a cult by an institution established to suppress the knowledge and use it for personal power and wealth. They became creators themselves, and the society we live in today is their creation. The great work of ages, they call it. In their modelled natural system, you are but a blood cell in the body of their beast, transporting the oxygen of labour and money through its economic bloodstream, thereby feeding the beast. But it has cancer. Global, social, and economic problems are the result. The cabal don't allow the economy to phase and resonate, or to breathe, as it would in its natural form. They intervene at source, literally, to ensure that resonance is attuned by default to the note that they play. And these are known as Pythagorean commas. I'll talk more on this as things progress. They create currency, ex nihilo, literally from nothing. That's the first Pythagorean comma, incidentally. This apparently defies the laws of energy conservation, but it's a known fact that energy itself is created ex nihilo. That is, if we ignore the fact that it extrudes through this 0 point from a higher four-dimensional geometry, appearing ex nihilo, but breaking no laws of conservation at all, because it's not. The cabal employ that geometry, and that's why the economy takes on a life of its own, literally. But then they break the natural system by charging interest on money at source, which does not and never did exist. That's the second Pythagorean comma, or intervention. And this is inflation and taxation too. The energy they draw to balance the ex nihilo currency is yours. The system literally eats itself. It literally eats you. Or, one could say, it's eaten by those who sit atop the global pyramid of power. It would regain a natural balance over 7 years, thereabouts, simply by the state printing and issuing its own currency, thereby removing all inflation and abolishing taxation, because taxation would no longer be needed. This last point has made people think I'm crazy for years, but it's a fact, and I didn't come to this blindly. It first became clear when I studied for various financial and economic qualifications, all worthless incidentally, as the current economic situation proves, and it's supportable economic fact. not one that they teach in universities, though. This is why the current and ongoing financial crisis is going to lead to a complete meltdown globally, and why this has been predictable for so long to any with insight. As the system itself is a resonant structure, many people with, shall we say, resonant minds have picked up on this reality through other more spiritual paths. And there are many ways into this, 7 apparently. The financial system is a natural system created by man. It's a dying body, its masters know this, but they have a new beast planned as this one apparently dies. Centralization of power to unelected financiers such as the European Union, American Union and African Union is the process of breaking down cell walls in the natural body of this planet's population. Disguised as liberal socialism, it's actually quite schizophrenic, because we all know that it promotes unrestrained free market capitalism, already being heralded as dead in the light of this economic collapse. State intervention is coming back, supposedly. Governments are nationalizing banks. But twist the Mobius strip, and what you see is that the banks actually are privatizing government. Welcome to the return of National Socialism in disguise, quite brilliantly disguised as Marxism or socialism. But then again, it always was National Socialism, wasn't it? People tend to miss this. That is the reality of our leaders' so-called solution to an economic problem that they engineered. This is why people are confused by the differences between right and left-wing politics. There are none. They took over politics long ago. What you indulge in or ignore are simply the illusion of democracy that is left. The cabal has worked towards this goal since the end of World War II. It is no coincidence that Hitler's chief rocket scientist headed NASA until scarily recently. In fact, one could be forgiven, if they were to Google Operation Paperclip, for believing that the Third Reich actually just moved to America. Its key figures certainly did. NASA, for example, instigated the "did we land on the moon" conspiracy to deflect the "yes, we landed, but we're not going to tell you what we found there" conspiracy, all mysteriously annihilated in some great cataclysm. This still confuses even conspiracy theorists to this day, but it's a simple twist in perception, and they don't have to do much to achieve it. We may have all heard of the face on Mars, and how it's been poo-pooed even again, but are you aware of how far the research has really gone, and what's really been proven? Did you ever wonder why Neil Armstrong never spoke openly, although now he does, and his words allude to so many things, all of which confirm the point I'm making here? Many astronauts, scientists, and technicians say the same thing. The current global economic collapse is a global coup d'etat over the last enemy of this cabal. That's you and me. And the coming global union has already removed basic rights from the populations via anti-terror legislation as a result of staged terror attacks specifically for this purpose. Maybe you don't realize it yet, but you will if another terror event hits the UK or the US, or if civil disorder erupts over the economic crisis, and it will. A state of emergency immediately enacts the police state. We're told they will defend us against those who would remove our freedom and democracy, so-called terrorists, but create the conditions under which they do just that. And we ask for it. Problem, reaction, solution, a phrase coined by David Icke, the geometry again of the Mobius strip. The cabal themselves, though, know it as a dialectic. It's often referred to as the Hegelian dialectic. Initiates attribute the origin of this knowledge to an earlier high civilization on Earth and across our galaxy, which genetically engineered humanity as a labor source. They then bred with them. There was a cataclysmic event, And what caused that cataclysm is irrelevant here, if not obvious anyway. What we know as history is actually the story of the rebuilding of humanity after that cataclysm. This is, after all, what most religious traditions detail, and it's supported by every branch of science, particularly the new science that arose from it, such as astroarchaeology and exobiology. A high science became fragmented into various streams, including myth and religion, and was meticulously sought by some and rediscovered again over time. By high science, I mean an entire cosmology and philosophy. Isaac Newton, for example, spent more than half his life looking for the code in the Bible. Then he discovered gravity. Then Maxwell discovers, on the back of many great minds, electromagnetic forces. Then Einstein, on the back of many great minds, realizes that E equals mc squared. Then we go to the moon. Then we suddenly stopped, apparently. Then Crick and Watson discovered DNA, in an LSD-induced vision, incidentally. But Maxwell's equations, as taught today, are abbreviations. So are Einstein's. And the full equations in both cases reveal four-dimensional scalar aspects that unify gravity and electromagnetism. Indeed, they unify all sciences. The resultant technology has been utilized and suppressed, should it ever arise publicly. I don't expect anyone to just believe that, but it's true nonetheless. It's not a secret once you look. Proving it, of course, isn't possible here, so I won't try. But for anyone who has indulged me so far, perhaps I could share a few insights between apparently unconnected things. Some of what follows is so fundamental to education that it's a crime it isn't taught in every school. Other aspects are simply not known at all, or are misunderstood. So let's play God for a while. If you were a creator intelligence and you wished to create something in our three-dimensional reality, you would have to somehow take the infinite and make it finite. You would have to give it mass in 3 dimensions. How would you do that? Well, the recipe book says you must reciprocate infinity. Take infinity and reciprocate it. Numbers are infinite. You can always add one more. They go on forever. And there are 3 infinities. The other 2 are space and time. So imagine an infinite stream of whole numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and on into infinity. Now, reciprocate them so that 2 becomes a half, 3 becomes a third, 4 becomes a quarter. And reciprocate simply means putting 1 over that number. In other words, dividing that number into 1. You now have an infinite sequence of reciprocal numbers. They're fractions. And if you add them all together, they'll never quite total 1. They are still infinite, but are now wholly contained between 2 numbers. And you've just put bounds on the infinite by reciprocating it. And, in 4-dimensional physics terms, you have created matter. All electromagnetic gravitational forces are scalar and exist in 4 dimensions. They expand in 4 space according to the infinite series of whole numbers, whilst extruding into 3 space as the reciprocal of those numbers. This is why the inverse square law crops up throughout nature, specifically with regard to gravity. Science tells us that matter is energy condensed into little particles. Nonsense! It works in the equations and in the technology that arises from them for explainable reasons, but it is still not entirely correct. Think about it. All electromagnetic forces propagate naturally according to the inverse square law in 3 space. So how is this energy supposed to condense itself if its natural tendency is to expand in space? It never stands still. Energy is not reciprocal matter. It is reciprocal time. Matter, on the other hand, is reciprocal space. Without one, the other cannot and does not exist. Matter exists because of the geometry of the space that contains it. They are, indeed, one and the same. It's just that they look different. But that's only because they are reciprocal opposites, like 4 and a quarter. Different scalar reflections of the same energy. Reflections on different scales, different levels, twisted by the Mobius strip geometry that dominates this 0 point, where 4 space becomes 3 space. To begin to see the beauty in what I'm hoping to show in part 2, it's handy to dispense with the notion that matter and energy are the same thing. It's really a 4-dimensional world we live in, not 3-dimensional. Space and matter coexist, as do energy and time. They are reciprocals of each other quite literally. Time is not the 4th dimension. It's not a dimension at all. It's an inertial energy which extrudes from the 4th dimension of our world. The 4th dimension is scale itself. As above, so below. This does not defy any of the equations of physics. Indeed, it explains their anomalies and unifies them. But this is intended to reveal some of the connections between things that you may not have seen yet. Things which will give an indelible insight, albeit fleeting, into the nature and expanse of this esoteric knowledge. Remember, though, it's not knowledge that's bad. It's how it's used which defines good or bad, and intent is a key to that. Some of what follows is literally mind-blowing, not only in its beauty, but in the realizations that dawn when one eventually sees the apparently unconnected connect like conjoined twins.